This coming Sunday is Asara Teves.
Yes.
It's the 10th day of Teves, which isn't just any date on the calendar, but it's one of our 4 fast days. There are 6 fast days basically throughout the year. There's Yom Kippur, the only biblical fast day. You're welcome to join us. Then we have the 4 fast days that are Zeichel HaMikdash. They commemorate the destruction of the temple. That as a Churban, we remember. That's is the Navi and Zechariah's Som HaRavi, the fast of the 4th day, 4th month. Som HaChamishi, the Som of the 5th. Som HaShavi, the Som HaAsseres. So there's 4 fast days that we set up and to remember the destruction of the temple. So the 4th fast is Yud Zayin Tammuz, that's in the summer. 3 weeks later is Tisha B'Av, that's the 5th month. The 7th month is Som Gedalia, right after Rosh Hashanah. And the 10th month is Teves, Asara B'Teves, which falls out this Sunday. And then we have another fast day, Tainus Esther, which is on the low end. It's a Tainus Show Simcha, as they call it. It's a happy day. We're remembering the miracle. We beat Haman and the enemy. So there are basically 6 fast days. So clearly Yom Kippur is alone on the top. It's the only biblical fast day. And in fact, on the only biblical fast day of the year, the day before Erev Yom Kippur, we have a biblical mitzvah to eat. In contrast to other religions where the focus is more on fast and taking away, in Judaism we have many more feast days than fast days, not even close. And therefore, even on the one biblical fast day, we make sure you have besides, even without a mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, we do it, but in addition to eating normally we have a special meal, and in order to make sure we have enough strength that we should be able to fast on Yom Kippur. So even when the Torah tells us to fast, it goes out of the way, Ushmartem li'ol nafshoseichem, one has to take care of themselves. And of course, Yom Kippur included, but certainly any other fast days, that if someone is a chole sheyesh bo sakana, someone who's in danger, that by they're risking their life by not eating, so then there's nothing to discuss. You don't have a mitzvah to fast. In fact, it's an aveira if you do fast. Certain people have to eat on Yom Kippur. Certain people have to fast, but it doesn't change the rest of the day. You can do everything else the same. Eating is only one component of the fast day. The purpose of a fast day in general, as the Rambam says, is to get close. That even though people like to say, you know what, but I'd be eating, and we could do tshuva, we could repent more, but there's something about feeling a need when you're hungry and you have a need, it's natural to turn upward and ask God for help and that type of thing. So Yom Kippur is a biblical fast day where we get to eat. In fact, Yom Kippur is one of the days it appears that some other religions have caught on to because they're very big on fast. They fast for, 30 days or 40 days, a month?
1 month.
A month. I spoke to David, how's business affected during Ramadan? He told me business is great because they have parties every night afterwards. So you're not really affected at all. And we find many things they do. They daven 5 times a day. That's basically Yom Kippur. We do once a day. We go down on our knees once a year, maybe twice, but Yom Kippur. And they do that. So many things they've focused on the Yom Kippur aspect. Other religions are focused on maybe other things. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it's all about love and that type of thing. So all of them are based on, Judeo-Christian, other things that come from the roots, many of them come from the roots in Judaism. So there's a mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur, a biblical mitzvah, and Tainus Esther is probably on the low end because it's a happy day. However, the 4 fast days, those are the 4 that we'll focus on now. Those are the 4 that you remember the Beis HaMikdash, the Churban, the destruction. So actually, within the 4, not all 4 are equal. There's an interesting Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah says, on Daf Yud Ches, I believe, Al Shisha Chadashim Hashluchim Yotzim. There's 6 months a year, not anymore, but when we used to sanctify the moon through witnesses, they had to go see when Rosh Chodesh was. So in 6 months of the year, they used to send out messengers. And they go through each one to know when the holidays are. On Av, they had Tainus because of Tisha B'Av. But what's conspicuous by its absence is the month of Teves, or for that matter, the month of Tammuz. The Gemara asks, but what about Yud Zayin Tammuz? What about Asar Teves? If you don't send messengers, how are we going to know what day it is? So the Gemara has a whole discussion. The Gemara says like this. They quote the pasuk in Zechariah. It says that the Som Haravi, the fast of the 4th month, Som HaChamishi, the fast of the 5th month, fast of the 7th, 10th, Yelem Lehem with Sason or Simcha. Will be a day of Sason and Simcha, a day of joyous occasion. So the Gemara asks, there's an apparent contradiction in the verse. In the beginning of the verse it says fast, which implies a sad day. No, not a happy one, certainly. And then the end of the pasuk it says it's going to be a happy day. So which one is it? So the Gemara says it depends. There are 3 stages in Jewish history. So the first stage is that if there's no Beis HaMikdash and there's religious persecution, so then you have an obligation to fast. If there is a Beis HaMikdash in this peace, you have an obligation to make a yontif, to be b'simcha. You have a big suda, because there's nothing to mourn over. The Beis HaMikdash is up, and we're living in peace, so that's the time to celebrate. And then there's a middle category, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, but you're not living in religious persecution either. So then the Gemara says, Ratzu misanin, Ratzu ein misanim. If you want to fast, you can fast. If you don't want to fast, you don't have to. So there's 3 levels. One is that for no Beis HaMikdash religious persecution, you have an obligation to fast. The opposite is you have an obligation to party. It's a day of Simcha. If the Beis HaMikdash is up, and it's a time of Shalom, of peace. And probably the situation North America, there's no open. Of course, you're always going to have anti-Semites, but in terms of the government setting anti-Semitic laws and that, so it's safe to say in North America, at least at this point, there's no religious persecution, and we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. So it's optional. So that's what the Gemara says. Since it was only optional to fast on Yud Zayin Tammuz and Asar Teves, so we didn't have to send that. We didn't find the need to send out messages. Whatever they find out because it's not a mandatory fast. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, what about Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av's in those 4. Tisha B'Av is included in the 4 fast days. So the Gemara says, Shani Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is different. Why is Tisha B'Av different? Tisha B'Av is different because there was double trouble. That both temples were destroyed on that day. On Tisha B'Av we have Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni. So since both temples were destroyed on Tisha B'Av, so therefore we're more strict by Tisha B'Av, and therefore you don't have an option. You have to fast on Tisha B'Av, and therefore they sent out messengers. So what's the explanation that this Tisha B'Av was stricter than the other fast? So to go back a step, the Ramban writes, the Nechman in his writes in the Sefer Torah Sa'adam, he writes that originally all 4 fast days had the same status. They both comes from the prophet, and not only that, but they all started the night before. We couldn't wear leather shoes. We couldn't do all the different types of inuyim we can't do on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av. So that applied to all fast days. However, the rabbi saw it was too much for the people to take 4 of those fast days, not eating 24 hours, 25 hours. So they relaxed it by the other fast days. So the question is, does Tisha B'Av retain its Divrei Kabbalah status? Does Divrei Kabbalah retain from the prophets? Is that what it is? Well, no. Or it's also only rabbinical, but the rabbi said on a rabbinic level we're going to treat it. We'll see if there's a practical difference or not. But the bottom line is that's why we see that we're much more lenient on the other fast days. Tisha B'Av isn't quite Yom Kippur either. You're much more strict on Yom Kippur. Then Tisha B'Av is stricter than the other fast days, but not on the level of Yom Kippur. Then we have these 3 fast days. So it comes out from the Gemara, the fast days are optional. So at one point in history, they clearly were optional. What about today? Does it mean so today it's optional to fast? But that's why we're lenient on many, even a cholesh ein bo sakana, on someone doesn't have to be life-threatening not to fast. We're much more lenient in terms of these fast days. Pregnant women, nursing women, someone who has some. So number one, it starts off because what's it similar to? So some point out it's similar to evening service, Ma'ariv, because the Gemara says in Brachas. The Gemara has a machlokes, I think it's Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Gamliel, about the nature of Tfilas Aravis. So we know Shacharis and Mincha, morning service and afternoon service, are mandatory. There's a discussion in the Gemara about Ma'ariv, whether it's optional or mandatory. So we follow the opinion that it's optional. However, the Bahag writes, even though we did HaGemara, it's optional, but Kvar Shavyo La Kachova, we've taken upon ourselves as mandatory. The Klal Yisrael in the good senses, because Ma'ariv is the nighttime, is danger, being in Gola, so we've taken upon ourselves as mandatory. Even though Me'ikr Din HaGemara was optional, it's not optional for us anymore, but it's still a lower level obligation. Well, as we see, Ma'ariv isn't treated the same as Shacharis and Mincha in terms of doing other things instead, etc. If you have another mitzvah coming up. So Ma'ariv, so it says Kashayo La Kachova. So that's a discussion. What does that mean? That Ma'ariv we've taken upon it ourselves. So does it mean that once it's taken, did the quality of Ma'ariv change? In other words, is it basically that now it's no different qualitatively than Shacharis or Mincha? Oh no, still qualitatively it's still optional. However, it's what I guess you could coin the expression you're voluntold. When your boss tells you to volunteer something, you're forced to volunteer, as we could call it. So basically, it's not necessarily part of the strict explanation of your job, but basically you don't really have a choice of doing it. If your boss tells you to do it, if you want to keep your job, you do it. So that's the same question by the fast days. When we say Kvar Shavyo La Kachova, it's the same thing here. We've taken upon ourselves as mandatory, but still not on the same level of the other one. So therefore, because it's fundamentally optional from the Gemara, even though we've taken upon ourselves, there are many leniencies we'll see. So one of the leniencies will be is, when does the fast end? So since the Gemara actually says that really it's optional, but we do it anyway, we've taken upon ourselves, we've been voluntold, we've taken upon ourselves as one of the things we do. However, the question is, when does the fast end? So we know when does the day end? Well, it shouldn't make any difference. The fast ends when the day is over, and the fast begins when the day begins. So when does it end? So in general, we have a category called sunset. Sunset is usually the end of day, and when the nightfall, when the 3 stars come out, obviously at different times depending where you live, that's definitely night. So before sunset, it's definitely day, and when the 3 stars come out, it's definitely night. The question is twilight, ben hashmashos, the time period in between. That's known as Suffolk Yom, Suffolk Light. In Halacha, that's known as doubtful day, doubtful night. In Halacha, we treat it as a doubt. So therefore, so we usually, on a biblical mitzvah, was strict, because a doubt on a biblical law was strict on. On a rabbinical mitzvah, we're lenient. So that time is better. So the Gemara says in Psachim, the Gemara says that when it comes to Ben HaShemashos of Tisha B'Av, so then it's a discussion in the Gemara. but that we don't eat ben hashmashas of Tisha B'Av. That this twilight period by Tisha B'Av, that we don't eat before. However, what are the implications of the Gemara? Only Tisha B'Av. But Asar B'Teves, Yud Zayin Tammuz, Som Gedalia, we do eat. So at Ben Hashmashos. And the Gemara says in Tainis, called Tainis Shel Shaka Cham Alav Shema Tainis. That so the way the Piskei Tosfos learns the Gemara is that really all fast days end at sunset, and only we're strict because of Tisha B'Av. Some more indifferently, but that's the way the Piskei Tosfos, and therefore he says. So number one is we have that Me'ikr Din HaGemara, it's optional, but we're voluntold. We have to fast, but it's still we're only volunteering in theory. And then we have the opinion of Piskei Tosfos and others who say the fast ends at sunset. So it's already two leniencies. And then, so we're strict anyway. We're going to fast, like other Rishonim say that the fast ends at nightfall. So when is nightfall? So the different opinions exactly when nightfall is. Like from the Vilna Gaon, 13 and a half minutes after sunset in Eretz Yisrael, that becomes nightfall. So if you look on the calendar, let's say, in North America, the standard, let's say, when do we end Shabbos? So in different yeshivas, they end 72 minutes. But let's say the typical, we'll call it the Young Israel time, is about, it's an hour after candlelighting. Candlelighting is 18 minutes before sunset. So it's around 42 minutes after sunset. That's when we usually end Shabbos in that area. But Shabbos is a biblical law and it's very strict. So therefore, there's reason to be strict and wait to 42 minutes after. However, as we pointed out, the tainis are only rabbinical, and today we're being voluntold. It's even Me'ikr Din HaGemara. It's only voluntary, even though we don't have that choice anymore, but it's fundamentally voluntary. So therefore, if you take those three factors, number one is the fast is optional, midin ha-gemara. Secondly, some say the fast is over at sunset. So therefore, we're going to be machmer anyway, but we don't have to be machmer at the same time we do on Shabbos. If Shabbos is 42 minutes, so we have to check the exact time, but Leo Levy, there's some opinions that nightfall is around 25 minutes after sunset. So that's what we'll rely on. If you'll notice, the time when the fast ends is going to be a lot earlier than the time when Shabbos is over. What the day's over the same time. It is over the same time, but the different opinions when that night is over. So when it comes to Shabbos, we have to be strict on, we're going to wait to the later time. However, when it comes to, let's say, Yud Zayin Tammuz or Asar B'Teves, where, again, Me'ikr Din HaGemara is optional. Some say the fast is over at sunset anyway, so therefore we're going to be machmer that we're waiting at all, so there's no need to wait to the latest time. So therefore there are those, and that's the minute here, that we wait to about 20-25 minutes after Shkia, and then we view that as nightfall. That's why the time for ending the fast is much earlier than the time when Shabbos is over. So, as we all know, today is Asar B'Teves, one of the 4 fast days that we observe, Zeichel Churban. The Navi tells us there's 4 fast days. The Som HaRavi, the Som of the 4th month, Yud Zayin Tammuz, the Som of the 5th month, Tisha B'Av, the Som of the 7th month, Som Gedalia, and the Som of the 10th month, today Asar B'Teves. It's actually a discussion in the Gemara, what day do we fast in Asar B'Teves? Different events happen. But regardless, out today we do the 10th day. So there's an interesting Avidraham that the Beis Yosef quotes in Shulchan Aruch, that there's something unique about Asar B'Teves, different than Tisha B'Av, different than Yud Zayin Tammuz, and different than Som Gedalia. What is that? So this Avidraham says that if Asar B'Teves would fall out on Shabbos, he says we would fast. we know the only other fast day that we fast on Shabbos is Yom Kippur. But even Tisha B'Av, which is always right under Yom Kippur, and it's definitely much stricter than today. We would have started it the night before, and other halachas would be involved. We know when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos, we push it off to Sunday, because we always push off bad tidings. Tainus Esther, which is a happy day, we just happen to fast, so then we move it up sometimes to Thursday. But Tisha B'Av, which is the ultimate in tragedy, is the day of mourning, we push off from Shabbos to Sunday. So it's a very difficult Avid drum to understand. The Beis Yosef writes that if Asseres Teves would fall on Shabbos, he said we'd fast on Shabbos. Because he says, the Pasuk says in Yechezkel, Be'etzem hayom hazeh. It says on this day, similar to what we say on Yom Kippur. So he says, since it says on this day, Be'etzem hayom hazeh, therefore he says we can't push off the fast. But it's a big chiddush, but it's easy to say because it can't happen. What I mean is the way our calendar is set up, Asar B'Teves can't fall out on Shabbos. So we can't disprove it or prove it, but that's the Avid Drum's opinion, that if it falls out on Shabbos, we would fast. A proof to his side is not a full proof, but a semi-proof is it does fall out on Friday. And normally if a fast falls out on Friday, like the Tainus Esther, we don't fast on Friday, we move it to Thursday or to another day. But the halach is, and it does happen, and it did happen, that we do fast on Friday, something we normally don't do, based on this Avid Drum, because it says, Be'etzem hayom hazeh, you can't push off, for some reason, according to Avid Drum, you can't push off this fast of Asar B'Teves. That needs some explanation. Because Tisha B'Av is definitely more strict, and both temples were destroyed, and Asar B'Teves is the beginning of the end, that Nebuchadnezzar went around and began the siege of the walls of Jerusalem. And we know the beginnings of the worst, but it can't be worse than the actual destruction. So why is it that by Tisha B'Av we push it off to Sunday, but Asar B'Teves we keep it on Shabbos, in theory, because we don't have it. It doesn't happen, but if it did happen, we would. So there's an interesting Chasim Sofer. The Chasim Sofer asked the following question. He says, we know there's a concept of Yortzeit. Yortzeit, we all know, when on the date of the death, so you observe a Yortzeit. Different customs among the Yeshivish, the Litvish versus the Hasidish. How do you observe a Yortzeit? The two schools of thought, fast versus feast. So, in fact, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, who's not Hasidish, he says, where did the Indian of Tikkun come from, having like some honey cake and other things? The Hasidim wouldn't agree with this, but Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, we all know on Erev Pesach that it's a fast day for the firstborn, but we know the custom is most synagogues make a siyum. They finish the certain learning, and we have a meal afterwards. He says that was the original custom. On a Yortzeit, for people who didn't want to fast, they'd make a siyum and then have the meal. But what happened over time was they dropped the siyum and kept the meal. But Hasidim have other reasons in terms of why they think you should have a meal. But it's fast versus feast. In halacha, we pass, if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, it says you should fast on a Yortzeit. There's a minhag among many to fast on a Yortzeit. Yet we know if a Yortzeit falls out on Shabbos, so everyone agrees you don't fast on Shabbos. Yet there's another halacha called the Tainus Chalom. Tainus Chalom, which basically is a bad dream, not just any bad dream. I'm not getting into the technical details, but it's a bad enough dream in halacha which you have to fast. If someone really close dies, terrible things happen, the details aren't important. But a real bad dream, the halacha is you have to fast the next day. Afilu b'Shabbos. If you had this bad dream Friday night and you wake up Shabbos morning all shook up, even on Shabbos, the Shulchan Aruch says one should fast. So the question is, what's the difference? How come when it comes to a Yortzeit, or for that matter Tisha B'Av, when it falls out on Shabbos, we say no fasting today? Yet when it comes to a Tainus Chalom, a bad dream, the halacha is you have to fast, or at least you can fast. So The Chasam Sofer explains, because there's a fundamental difference between the two of them. A yortzeit is something a la avar. A yortzeit is going on something that already happened. That it was a mazel ra, your parents, one of your loved ones passed away at this time, and therefore that's why you're fasting. But that's something that happened last year, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. And Tisha B'Av as well. We're fasting on Tisha B'Av over the Churban Habayis, over the destruction of both temples, the first one and the second. But it's over an event that already happened. So something over Tzara in the past, something that happened bad in the past, that doesn't warrant fasting on Shabbos. But a Tayas Chalom is on the future, that a person is taking, it's a simim in Hashamayim, it's a sign from heaven, then you shook up about it, that that the dream was something about what's going to happen in the future, and therefore you're all concerned about it. A Sarah that might happen in the future, that's something we're always looking forward, not backward, and that's something you shook up about, and therefore the halacha says one could fast. In fact, the way Rav Chaim learns the fasting, it's not even so much, we know there's a mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, there's a mitzvah of enjoying yourself on Shabbos. So, how do most normal people enjoy themselves? They eat, they have their cholent, their roast, their chicken, whatever, chicken soup, your kinetos, whatever you eat. But sometimes, not usually, but sometimes when a person is so shook up, they don't want to eat. So you have a terrible dream about it. It's not that you're fasting for the sake of fasting. That is my own. I can't enjoy eating now, so why should I eat? Why should I take the calories if I'm not enjoying them? Why waste it? I just don't want to eat, so I won't eat. So Tayas Chalom is something about the future. You're shook up about you had a bad dream and something's going to happen, and you don't want to eat. So the difference is that
maybe not wanting to eat. It's not a locha that it is a tsar. Not wanting to eat is a form of kapora. It's a form of kapora. Because according to Shmuel, you have an onesh. When a person has a halom, then it's a siman ra, that things are going to go bad. So he wants to, so to speak, pay off the kapora, that everything should go well. So that's like a schar. Instead of giving stock, he says, that's part of tshuva. Tshuva's alocha of tshuva, so that is really the oneg. It's not that the oneg that I'm not eating. Doesn't make sense. Even though Rabbi Chaim said it, you cannot say.
That's the kasha on it, because the Gemara says you have to make it up. According to Rav Chaim, why do you have to make up the fast?
So it didn't seem to Terence is as follows. When a person feels a need to somehow pay a schar for that wrongdoing, and that gives him comfort. It's a schar, it's like an onesh, because Shmuel says that everything requires an onesh. Now the question is what the onesh is. For Gemara says if you you put on your shoes in the morning, and you put your left shoe on your right foot, things are not going so well because of onesh. So what do you see? It's not so much the tsar, the pain, but it's an attitude that you recognize, because hakol sachet, something went wrong. So once you marker that, then you can do tshuva, and it's a form of tshuva. And that gives you oneg Shabbos. You feel better that you were able
it's therapeutic.
to compensate
Right.
for that.
Right, so the Tayas Chalom, right, is something about you're shook up about the future, so therefore the Chasam Sofer says that's why you could fast. What does it have to do with Asar B'Teves? How does he explain Asar B'Teves that we fast on Shabbos of the 10th of Teves? So he explains, I guess based on different, he doesn't quote them, I assume he has different Midrashim or Chazals to back it up. But he says during the time when the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, by his Rishon, by his Sheni, he says, when was it decided in Shamayim? When was in heaven decided that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed that year? He says, based on earlier sources, on Asara B'Teves, on the 10th of Teves, today, is the day where it's decided whether the Beis HaMikdash will be up or down in any coming year. He says, not just that year, but every coming year. So in Shamayim right now, last night, today, it's decided in Shamayim whether we're going to have Binyan Bayis Shlishi, are we going to have the third Beis HaMikdash this year, or it's going to be a destruction. As the Gemara tells us, that every generation is responsible if the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, or in our case, if it's not rebuilt. Because the source of the sin of sinas chinam, of unwarranted hatred, hasn't been fixed yet, and it's every generation is responsible to get it going. So the Chasam Sofer says the reason why we fast, Rabbi Drum says we fast on Asara B'Teves, even on Shabbos, because that's on Asara Hasida, that's on the future. Right now, we're not fasting over what happened thousands of years ago, but we have the ability now to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash and have Binyan Bayis Shlishi. So that's why Asara B'Teves Be'etzam Hayom Hazeh, even on Shabbos. And in fact, some later Achronim point out, again, it's conjecture, but interesting anyway, that the Gemara tells us in Tainus that all these fast days we have, besides specific events that happen, the destruction of the temple, but there are earlier events that happen. There are a precursor to these days. So we know on Yud Zayin Tammuz what happened. Even before these, the reason why we fast Zeichel L'Churban, but the sin of the golden calf happened, the Cheda Egel. Or on the 9th of Av, what happened? The sin of the Meraglim. So we have different events that happen earlier as a precursor. But Chazal don't tell us anything. What happened at Asara B'Teves? What happened today that's this event that happened earlier? So some suggest, it's interesting speculation. They say, you know what happened today on Asara B'Teves? They said that's when Mechiras Yosef happened. The sin of the brothers selling Yosef, that happened today. Why? Where does he get that from? So, because the month of Chodesh Teves is known in rabbinic literature as each name has their own, each month has their own names to it, has their own mazel. So Teves is known as the Chodesh of the Gedi, the Chodesh of the goat. And they quote the Psukim by Yosef as the Aries, I mean, that was the goat they took the multicolored coat and they dipped it in the blood. So that's an illusion that Mechiras Yosef happened on Asara B'Teves. In fact, that's why it's interesting to note that Vayigash always falls out around Asara B'Teves. Vayigash was yesterday, Asara B'Teves is today. Because what's the theme of Vayigash and the Haftorah of Vayigash? It's Yosef reconciling with the brothers. That Yosef could have taken revenge. He had the perfect setup. He could have taken revenge on the brothers, except he brought them in, Achicha, my brothers, don't worry about it. Different explanations, but working along these lines, that Yosef actually forgave his brothers. So that was the whole Yesod, is Avas Yisrael, that Joseph brought together his brothers and they cried over the future destructions of the temple, Yosef and Binyamin and Yehuda, and therefore the whole theme of the Parsha is Yosef getting better, he's bringing the brothers back together. In fact, because the whole sin was the sinas chinam, the brothers were jealous of Yosef, and this caused the Jews to go down to Mitzrayim, and it caused the exile. And that's what Chazal tell us, that was the cause of the destruction of the temple. One of the root causes was sinas chinam, was unwarranted hatred. And as Rav Kook always points out, if unwarranted hatred doesn't mean that we're not talking about someone who's crazy, you hate someone for no reason. You think you have a reason, but Chazal is saying that reason's not warranted. So if unwarranted hatred is the cause for the destruction of the temple, so Rav Kook always says, how do you bring it back? You go to the opposite extreme. Avas chinam. You love someone for no other reason except that he's a fellow Jew, he's a fellow human being, and you want to make peace with the person. So Vayigash, the theme of Vayigash is always about the Jewish people getting together, the brothers, Ma'isa Avos, Simon Labanim, what happens to the Avos, to our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, and the brothers, is a precursor for what's going to happen to us. So this, like the brothers got together and they made up for the terrible mistake of Mechiras Yosef. That's what Asara B'Teves is all about. All the 4 fast days is we get together, and we know, and especially Asara B'Teves, where according to the Chasam Sofer, today it's going to be decided what's going to happen on Tisha B'Av. Is Tisha B'Av we're going to be sitting on the floor and mourning again a Churban Bayis, or is this year going to be the year that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt? That's going to happen. That's decided in Shamayim today. And that's why, as the Chassid Sofer explained, that's why at Asseres Teves, Tisha B'Av, even when it falls on Shabbos, we don't fast. Because that's going on something that already happened, the Churban. Asseres Teves is like a tainis chalom. In that sense, it's something that's an indication of what's going to happen to us, something we still can do and something we still can change. That warrants even fasting on Shabbos. And that's what the Chassid Sofer explains, the Etzam HaYom Hazeh, and the connection between Parashas Vayigash and Asseres Teves. It's all about Avas Yisrael, about getting back together, learning how to treat people, getting back to the basics of how to treat people, being a mensch, and that's why Vayigash is always near Asseres Teves. So that's how he explains the Avidram. Independently, this Chiddush of the Avidram, that Be'etzem HaYom Hazeh, you have to fast even on Shabbos, that isn't accepted by everyone. The Minchas Chinuch clearly disagrees with this premise. How do I know? Because he says something else. He asked another question, why don't we fast when Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos? Why don't we fast on Tisha B'Av on Shabbos? Because why? Because why don't we fast on Shabbos in general? Because since it's a pasuk in Isaiah about kavod va'oneg, you have a mitzvah to honor and enjoy the Shabbos. That comes from the prophets. The prohibition of fasting comes from the prophets, Zechariah. So why don't we fast? So there are many reasons, but he answers as follows. He says, if you look at the Navi, all he says is the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the... he never mentions a day. The Nevi'im never mention a specific day of when you have to fast. And in fact, if you look at the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, 18b, you have a dispute on the different fast days. What day is it? Is it the 10th of Teves? Is it the 5th of Teves? Is it this month? In fact, what kind of machlokes? Just go see what the people fasted. Go back in history and see which. The answer is there was no specific. Today Chazal, we have a universal day. We can't change it anymore. But initially there wasn't a specific day. Different events happened during, whether it's Korban Bayis Rishon, Sheni, different events happened that during different time periods they picked different days. Because it was the month you get to pick one day of that month, the month of the 4th, the month, and therefore he says, even the prophets never picked a day. It was only the rabbis who picked a specific day. So that's why we don't fast on Shabbos, on Tisha B'Av, because there's nothing about the 9th day per se. From the prophets, it was any day of the month. And the rabbis, because of the double trouble that happened, that both temples were destroyed, so therefore that's why now we pick the 9th, now we pick the 10th, but now to keep the uniformity, we keep the same day. But it was the rabbis who picked the specific days now, but from the prophets itself, it was only the Som HaRavi, Som HaChamishi. That's why the Minchas Chinuch says we don't fast on Tisha B'Av on Shabbos. And so we see it's against the Avidram. The Avidram said specifically, the pasuk says, "Be'etzem HaYom Hazeh," you have to fast on the 10th day, even on Shabbos. So that's a minority view. We assume, like the others, that Pashas you wouldn't fast on the 10th of Teves. But either way, but working with the Avidram, that's how the Chassid Sofer explains it. That's something going on in the future, and something that worries us about the future warrants even fasting on Shabbos, versus mourning over a past event doesn't warrant, whether it's a Yortzai or whether it's Tisha B'Av, that doesn't warrant fasting on Shabbos.